So, first, I'd like to welcome David to our session today. David, it's really a pleasure to be welcoming you to this and congratulate you on founding it. Really, the whole issue of trauma-sensitive mindfulness. Not finding it because I know you worked with Willoughby Burton at Brown, who we had years ago talking about. Hold on, mindfulness is terrific, but there are some issues. But you've really brought that forward in your website and in your trainings to both mindfulness teachers and to therapists. So thanks for being here.
Thanks.
I'd like to start off getting a little bit personal because I just mentioned to you in our conversation a couple of minutes ago that we don't often have the opportunity to interview and speak and present speakers who are born and raised in Toronto. And it's especially nice to know that you did that. And so I'd like to kind of go back to your early days because I know you got interested in meditation, and then there's some serious issues that happened on a retreat that kind of really prodded you to go further. So I'd like to hear about both of those things. What got you interested in becoming a meditator, probably as a teenager, I would imagine, and then what happened on that retreat where made you rethink this?
Yeah, thanks for. I'm really happy to talk about it. And this is something I was saying offline, a bit of a homecoming for me because my mom has been, well, I grew up in Toronto, and then my mom for years now has been saying, oh, she's been forwarding me leading edge emails and seminars, and she's like, you should talk to Michael at some point. So and I just want to say thanks for having me, you and Emily. It really means a lot. And yeah, it all started in Toronto. This is such a treat for me to get to talk to a Canadian audience. I was just saying I was supposed to come home a couple of weeks ago. I couldn't come because of the strike for Air Canada. And so anyway, this is a chance to get my fix of Canada. I'm currently in the Bay. I grew up around North Toronto, and then I had a crush on someone when I was 14 whose mom was leading a meditation group for teens and down in the annex. So I'd go down there. It was in an apartment. Her name was Michelle Damaris. She was in the Tibetan tradition and started meditating and loved it. An incredible community. I found the practice really helpful. Ended up at UBC in Vancouver, and they would have weekends there, Vipassana weekends. Basically insight tradition teachers would come. And I got to be this is 99, and I was on a retreat with Tara Brach. Some of you will know Tara Brach, but as teacher. And I was the assistant. They would hire some young people to assist. So I ended up having lunch with her, and she was so cool. I thought everyone's so nervous, and she was so down to earth, so cool. And we ended up talking a little bit about trauma, and this started this long meandering journey for me. I ran into some trouble in my own practice where, some dysregulation and trauma that I was bringing to practice, it wasn't integrating, it wasn't working well in the instructions that I was getting. And so I ended up falling on my face a couple times as I took meditation more seriously, and that's what started this conversation for me. Ended up being a dissertation, came down to the US to do that, and have been in conversation with people like Tara, John Kabat-Zinn, about what's the intersection. If we put these two things in the room together in conversation, like deep, rigorous trauma work with meditation and meditation traditions, what would they say? What would we need to know? And how could we practice well?
So maybe we should just explore some of those ideas. Tell us more about how mindfulness can kind of unintentionally activate symptoms for people who've had trauma in their lives, and how you've explored that and how that's grown in your own teaching and training.
Thanks. Yeah. It's been such a journey. So when I did a master's thesis at UBC on mindfulness and occupational stress, my mom's a career counselor. And so that seemed like there was 40 studies at the time on mindfulness in 2003, which of course now has become thousands. And so the headline of my work, if people don't know it, Michael, you clearly do, is that mindfulness and meditation in particular could either help or hinder people who are struggling with trauma. Now, my work has been in two parts. The first part was really to have the conversation about why meditation would create difficulty, I'm happy to talk about that. And then I'd say the last 3 or 4 years, especially post-pandemic, as the word got out that people shouldn't just be doubling down in practice, because that's often what was happening, take it back to the cushion. There's been a more nuanced conversation, which I think you're often having in leading edge seminars around, okay, well, what are the tools that people would need? Like what would people, if they're going to have an amazing experience working with trauma in the context of meditation, what would they need to know and what advanced tools would be useful for them? So I'll let you steer here. Do you want to talk about where it could cause problems, or do you want to get into the tools, or what
Oh
would you
yeah,
think?
so maybe start from where it can cause problems, because this, I think you've raised that issue and brought it to the attention of many people who maybe weren't so aware of it. Now there's more awareness, certainly with therapists. But yeah, speak about that.
I'd say the headline here, I mean, it's we could spend hours here, but the headline is that in basic meditation practice, people can end up over focusing on traumatic stimuli. So, common example here, I experienced this and then ended up, Willoughby Britton, you mentioned, this is a researcher at Brown. We collected thousands of stories over time. And yeah, the basic story would go something like this. Someone would come to meditation with the best of intentions. Perhaps they have trauma. They've been told that, meditation can help reduce stress. Trauma is a form of stress. It's just intuitively, it's like, well, what could go wrong? And then at some point, often in meditation, you're, at least in the insight tradition, you're paying attention to what's predominant. So, we could be focusing on the breath, and then at some point, a thought may arise, and we attend to that. And we learn to actually have this dual awareness where we know that we can attend to a thought. We can also be attending to the body, or we know that we're practicing meditation. So this is really one of the core skills inside of meditation. And there's a setup, though, when people are encouraged to keep attending to what's predominant, that if someone's struggling with trauma, they'll end up focusing on what you could call traumatic stimuli. So thoughts, images, sensations related to a traumatic event. And if you're following just the basic instruction, just keep paying attention, that will sometimes be useful. But then for others, it's like they blow their circuitry. It's actually just too much. They can't be present with the traumatic stimuli, the memory, the image. And so the practice becomes a setup, and what it turned out that people are often needing more advanced instructions in those particular moments instead of just take it back to the cushion. And most of the teachers I met, that was what they knew. It's like, look, just stay with it. Just take it back to the cushion. Eventually the tangle will untangle. And again, that's true for some people, but then there's those edge cases, and that's mostly what I've been focused on is, okay, well, what would you do when you hit that place?
So, I know more therapists are integrating mindfulness in their practices, whether in person or virtually. And I know people who really respect your work, like Richard Schwartz, does that regularly. We have Frank Anderson who does that regularly. In terms of introducing a mindfulness component to a therapy session, what would be a good way to introduce that, and how can you be sensitive to people's reaction, especially if it's leading them in a not a very good place?
It's a great question. I end up working with a lot of coaches and therapists. It was originally for meditation teachers, but then, as you said, a number of people in transformative or mental health work were bringing in mindfulness. And I want to be so clear with the group here that in no way am I saying that mindfulness and interventions or skills wouldn't be useful or is somehow dangerous around trauma. Sometimes people can hear that in my work and think, oh, I'm just raising these flags and saying, don't meditate or don't practice mindfulness if there's trauma there. And that's not true. It can actually be deeply helpful. In answer to your question, the primary piece, the skill, is learning how to track, really to track a nervous system and to track the window of tolerance that someone's in. So folks will probably heard of this from Dan Siegel. I've been collaborating with Dan Siegel for years now around this, of how do you learn to work with someone through nonverbal signs and signals where you can assess if someone is more dysregulated or in their window of tolerance, more regulated. The issue with trauma is that mindfulness practices can end up exacerbating dysregulated arousal, which is a common part of trauma. So that first part that I mentioned of my work is if someone in a one-to-one session with you, you're asking them to pay close, sustained attention to their body or their experience. If that's creating dysregulation, that's not the moment to double down. That, you know, mindfulness practices can end up having this unintended consequence of exacerbating traumatic stress. Now, mindfulness itself is always going to be useful. It's that ability to have dual awareness, to know what's happening as it's happening. But then sometimes people can use it in a gross way. I was a somatic therapist, and I don't know about you, the main question I had was, where do you feel that in your body? I just keep coming back to that. And again, more is not better around mindfulness practices in therapeutic work. So it's about learning how to work with the window and how to come to the edge and also to stay in your own circle of competence when you're doing this work. So there's lots of different pieces, but fundamentally it's about you can introduce it, that's useful, and then just know that more won't always be better when you're in that practice.
Yeah, you're right. You speak a lot about the window of tolerance, which is so important. So, what are some of the other signs that therapists should be aware of in terms of understanding the window of tolerance of their clients?
Yeah, so Siegel, he based this, some of you will know, off of this. He was using systems theory and talking about that on one side of the window, we have, you could talk about chaos, and on the bottom, rigidity. And it wasn't Dan, but Pat Ogden, some of you will know from sensory motor work, who really took this original window of integration from Dan Siegel and said, let's talk about this, or sorry, river of integration, and said, let's talk about this in terms of the window of tolerance and trauma. So there's a whole, I could send this to you, we could send it out, but I have a whole sheet about what are the signs that you could look for that someone was more in dysregulation and hyper or hypoarousal. And there's intuitive symbols here, there are signs here. Someone's heart's racing, uh, their pupils are dilated, there's a hypervigilance. Or on the other side, there could be really a freeze, a shutdown, slurred speech, disorganized cognitive processing. These are the tools or the signs that we can learn just to notice, okay, someone's out of their window, which it's not inherently a problem. To me, the best trauma work is people who are learning to help people work with dysregulation at the edges of the window. It's not saying we just need to get calm and lock everyone in the window, but you need to learn to work those edges. And if you're someone who hasn't done trauma work, it's that you're not just doubling down once someone has become dysregulated. And that's been a big part of my work there.
So, this issue of window of tolerance also comes up in your framework of trauma-sensitive mindfulness. I think the five principles or the deep dive. So maybe you can go over those five principles of trauma-sensitive mindfulness, which is always part of your program.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, the basic idea was if you're someone who's going to be asking someone to be mindful, that's a big ask, and it's a fantastic ask. It's to me, it's probably a lot of what you're up to in Leading Edge, where you're asking people to slow down and attend to their experience, which again is amazing, especially with the amount of noise that we have in in our world right now on phones. And so it's a very powerful practice. And the proposal of trauma sensitive mindfulness or any trauma sensitive work is, do you know how to offer this powerful practice in a way that's sensitive to the needs of someone struggling with trauma? And basically, the idea here is you would know then, okay, how would I work with the body? How would I work with attention? And the core question here is two things. When would I back off? When would I suggest that someone actually not keep deepening into their own practice? Or when is the right moment to actually nudge into difficult territory. I think that's the art of it. And it's really difficult to know how and when to do that. The five principles are a little difficult to get into. I have a question for you. I have a practice that I do with people that's designed, it's like 2 minutes, and it's designed to try to convey the all the five principles, but in an embodied practice as a way to kind of
Hmm,
capture what it feels like. Are you open to me doing that?
definitely,
Okay,
definitely.
cool. Because it all, we could get into the course that I do gets into all the technicalities of this, but fundamentally it comes back to a way of being. Because as you know, when we're a therapist or a coach or a teacher, we can have the whole list of things to know about trauma-informed practice, and then there's how we're showing up, which has huge implications for our clients and students. So, okay, I'll try this with everyone. Some of you might have done this with me if you've been on a webinar with me. So, this is going to be a 2 minute practice about the embodiment of trauma sensitivity, and it's going to involve working with your hands. If you don't have access to your hands, you can visualize this practice instead. And it's going to be in two parts. And it goes really well if you are connected to your body. So I'll invite you to just spend a moment with your eyes open or closed, just taking a moment to tune in. You can take a couple of deeper breaths here if you like. Just a pause with all of us. There's a lot of content to talk about around trauma, but just notice how you're doing right now, your mood. If the window is familiar for you, you could notice, where am I in my window? Am I inside or outside? And then we'll try this experiment. I'm going to show you it here, but you can also just listen to me. What you're going to do is, as an experiment with one hand, I'm going to invite you to make a closed fist. And I'm going to show it up here in the camera, but you can do it down in your lap. You don't need to hold it up here. You can just have it in your lap, but I want you to see. So, closed fist. And I want you to imagine that the job of this fist is taking care of your safety and your survival. So, closed fist, taking care of your safety. And then, as an experiment with the other hand, see what happens if you try to pry open the fist. Just give yourself a moment with that. Like, what happens to the fist? What happens to the breath? Just noting that. Okay, great. You can let that go. And then we'll do part two here. Same thing. Closed fist, taking care of your safety and your survival. And then into the other hand here, bring a quality of care and curiosity and respect. Okay, care, curiosity, and respect into this hand. And then whenever you're ready, the instruction is to place that hand underneath the closed fist. And as you do that, see if you can communicate something like, good job. Of course you're closed. You're taking care of safety and survival. It's deeply intelligent what you're doing. I have no agenda here for you to open. I'm here, I'm listening. And then as you did the first round, just noticing what happens to the fist, what happens to your breath, any thoughts that are here in narratives. You could also finally notice here, is there anything that the closed fist would want to hear in particular from you? For example, like, you don't have to change, this is fine, or good job. Okay, and then whenever you're ready, you can let that go. And usually this is a time that I would ask people how they're doing, but I don't know. Michael, can I ask you?
Yeah,
How did that
well,
feel?
I just felt so much more calm when I was cradling as opposed to just being there or going against. It just felt, my breath felt more relaxed, just felt more relaxed and
Mhm.
open. But we can open it up right now. I mean, we usually wait for questions, but if anyone would like to go to the chat box and or let Emily know you would like to join the conversation, you can also use the hand raising function, and you're invited to do that if you would like.
It's always great to hear from someone. I'd love to hear, how that went, and also because there's often a lot of coaches or mental health professionals here, if that relates to your work, I'd also be curious to hear for people how that principle or that practice might apply for you.
The first comment is hokey dynamite. That was super powerful.
Hokey, I love that. Hokey dynamite.
Someone felt nurtured. Someone else said they felt relaxed and less tension in the fist. Someone else said, I noted that the closed fist relaxed when it was held. Someone else said it was quickly shifted from a fight to cooperation.
So if I could jump in, this is great. Feel free if people want to keep chatting. And Michael, I'll put it back to you here.
No, fine.
The core, as I said, like we could talk about all the principles and best practices around offering mindfulness in the context of trauma. How do you recognize trauma? How do you work with it once it's there? And really everything that I end up doing in trainings is coming back to a core principle that when you're working with trauma, you're fundamentally working with survival strategies. We've talked about we fight, flight, freeze, folks will have heard about. So often we're working with some version of a closed fist. If we come in with an agenda to open, it often doesn't go so well, as people know in their own lives, especially around trauma. But if we can come in with curiosity and respect, that tends to open a lot of possibilities. If I give a personal example, when I was on retreats, I tended to dissociate. I would really check out. And I got a lot of props from meditation teachers who said, you're a great meditator. Because I could sit still for multiple hours and they thought, oh, I'm just concentrating. At some point, once I started to do some trauma work, I realized, oh, I'm actually just leaving. And this is not really supporting my life. And it wasn't until a trauma therapist said to me, do you know where you're going? This is not a problem. Could you be curious about it? And I was making it a problem. Like, I got to get back. I got to get back. And she said, can you just notice where you're going? What happened right before it? How far away? She brought this quality of curiosity that opened the possibility of working with trauma in a much more supportive way, as opposed to I'm just trying to get back. And so that's the core principle is we have to learn to be respectful of trauma, not to coddle people, but really to respect the underlying mechanisms and then learn how to work with it skillfully.
The other two comments was that my fist relaxed and my sense of the light around me brightened. And then I tensed up my fist and held my breath with the first action. And then I found my fist relaxed and my breath deepened in the second.
Thanks, Emily.
I have more questions about the revisions of your new book, your course, but I would also wouldn't mind getting more feedback from people about your question or people who are using mindfulness in their practices or questions people might have at this point, if there are those. And again, you can come to the screen or put that into the chat box.
That's great. I love this part of it.
Yeah,
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
just see where we go.
Yeah, great.
And a lot of people have experiences using mindfulness practices in their therapeutic practice, when it's gone well or when it hasn't gone well. If you have particular questions to David at
Mm,
this point in time,
yeah.
let's just open it up.
Yeah. So the first question is, how do you differentiate between coddling and compassion?
Oh, this is a good one. Uh, Michael, I'd love your take on this too. I mean, I don't know. Oh, that's the first honest response. But it's absolutely the edge that I've been on the last, I'd say 8, 9 years now since the book came out, where there was whenever I was teaching, there was a depth of compassion in the space. People just wanted to make sure that they weren't causing harm. Of course, they wanted the best for their clients and their students. So there was a base level of compassion that was present. One of the things that started to happen, though, and this is around 2018, 2019 for me, is I'd say the compassion started tripping over into what felt like coddling. By that, I mean there was an implicit assumption that someone wouldn't be able to tolerate difficulty and trauma. There was almost a protectionism. And this comes up when I talk to teachers a lot, that they often talk about, oh, there's a culture of sometimes we're bubble wrapping our students. We want to make sure they have grit. So this has been in the mix. But I think there was a period where no one wanted to cause harm, especially meditation teachers. So everyone went to a bit of walking on eggshells. And so here's an example. In giving an instruction in a trauma-sensitive practice, one of the principles is to offer choice. So instead of saying, close your eyes and sit, you might say, I'm going to invite you in a moment to close your eyes and begin the practice. If that doesn't work for you, you could keep your eyes downcast and open. That's a classic trauma-sensitive. But people were going, especially Canadians that I met, were going to the degree of, you can close your eyes, and if you don't want to do that, you can leave them open. And if you don't want to do that, you can just leave. And it would just kind of toddle on that we didn't want to make people uncomfortable. And that to me was actually not in service of people who were coming to meditation to increase their capacity to be with difficulty. So that's how I'd talk about coddling, is if you're not trusting in the resilience of someone's nervous system, they've already been through the difficult thing, but we don't want to shield them from the exposure to the trauma. At the same time, we want to be compassionate. So that's the art. To me, that's all we do in the course really is it's trying to find that line over and over. And it's super dynamic. It's not a one-off thing. You have to really learn, I think, how to tack and move skillfully. Michael, you want to, I'm sure, Michael, you have thoughts. What do you want
Well,
to say
no,
about?
I hear what you're saying, and I kind of agree that, a lot of people go in the field because they're very good at taking care of others. They
Right.
found a job that will help them take care of others, as well as, help the others get over whatever they need to get over. But sometimes that continuum of coddling to compassion can edge over to the taking care of, because therapists are very good at taking care of others quite often. And they have a long history, or we have a long history of doing that from as children to professionals. So it's something to be very aware of, I think.
The overcaring is so I have that for sure where I would be, it's not supportive. If I can just, Tara Brock, I got to have an interview with her about this particular topic. And it's in this training we did, and she was talking about shame, and shame being often a core part of someone's experience of trauma. This feeling of I must be bad having lived through this experience. Now we could have a whole talk about it. I'm sure you already have seminars on it. But what Tara said is that is a moment in whatever role we're in to not overcare. Michael, to your point of, we're often very schooled in that. And she said her work in that moment as a practitioner, when someone's in the depths of saying, I'm a terrible person, or she wants to jump in and rescue, and her work has been feel her butt, stay in her own space, and convey through her presence that the shame and the trauma are okay to be present with. And she's having to work in her own, which is often, I think, the case for us. We need to work our own systems to not get on the other side of the street and stay within ourselves and say, fundamentally, this is okay. Trauma happens. That's okay. It's also workable. We need to have tools, of course, inside of that. But I love what you said there.
I think we have a bunch of questions
Oh, yeah.
and
Mm.
comments. So Emily, over to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So we've had a number of comments, including that someone works with people with chronic pain and stress, that mindfulness and focus slash body position is all about choice. Someone's a care coordinator for young people with intellectual disabilities. They have a mindfulness practice themselves, and they're just finding this topic fascinating. And we had anonymous question come in that says that they recently met with a practitioner who constantly redirected them to body sensations when trauma processing, and it wasn't helpful. So this conversation has been so validating. Um, we did have a question about the subtleties of dissociation, that they're challenging to notice, especially virtually. Do you have any tips for
Yeah.
helping with those subtleties?
I'm sure Emily and Michael, you have your own stories about this. It's hard. It's so hard. Oh yeah, we have a whole unit on this around online work and how to do it well. Here's a couple practical thoughts on it. One is psychoeducation at the beginning of a group. So letting people know about the possible tendency of dissociation. And we have a couple tools in the training around what are some uh, quick and easy check-ins that can be done via chat in Zoom that gives the instructor basically a quick snapshot of how things are going in the group. We'll work with the window, for example. We have a scale that we'll use. And then at the beginning of a trauma-informed meditation group, the instructor will say, I'd like you to put a one-word mood check into the chat, as well as a number that represents where you are in your window, 5 being in the middle of the window, 8 being out of it. So that's one way that you can start to get data points quite quickly. The second thing I've noticed is having a second person. So Michael and Emily, you work as a team. If something happened here in the session where someone needed some additional support, Emily, I know you're doing multiple things, but it's so invaluable when you're not solo. And then finally, around camera use, I think we can start to track when people might be dissociating. You're starting to get that 1,000-yard stare. Someone's there, but they're not there. Again, of course, it's difficult to know. But if you have someone that you're teaming with, you can always chat and check in, or you can do an email later. Anyway, those are a couple, some practical things, but also to say it's really hard. It's so hard on Zoom and so much easier in person. Hey, Michael, can I, one thing on a comment? There was the person working with chronic pain.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just make one comment on that.
Sure.
One of one of the core, and I could put this to you or the whole group. I'd say one of the core competencies that we're learning in becoming trauma-informed mindfulness teachers, practitioners, is the ability to discern and work with avoidance and exposure. So people will know exposure work at NAFOA. This is actually one of the most empirically grounded approaches around trauma, is that you're purposefully exposing someone to the trauma. So someone comes in with a phobia or fear, a trauma around snakes. You either talk about the story, they might recount the story, maybe there's some visual cues around that. Anyway, so exposure. At the same time, so then there's this practice around avoidance where if someone is becoming overwhelmed, it might be actually strategic to back off of the stimuli and keep them in their window and not overwhelm them. The core issue in meditation is a practice of exposure. Meditations, as you know, it's not meant to be a sweet, easy practice. It is edgy for people. You're asking them to pay attention to the present moment. And if they're traumatized, that will often lead them into contact with trauma. So exposure in some ways is good. It's a part of mindfulness. We don't, though, there will be times, as I said, though, that we want to back off. So we tell people it's okay, open your eyes, pay attention to something different. But if we go too far in the direction, we're practicing avoidance. We're just telling people anytime they feel uncomfortable, do something different. And so anyone that's really bringing mindfulness interventions into one-to-one work or as teachers, you're trying to find a path through those extremes to me of exposure and avoidance. And that's the art of it to me over time. So we talk in the course, talk about a lot of case studies around this, like how would you know? Because it's not just a list, like if X, then Y, sometimes, but it's often more that art, which is why I think we keep coming to these discussions, is that it's not something we learn once, it's something we're practicing all the time. So I just wanted to name that.
Um,
Emily, there. Oh, I think we have
David
a
has his
raised
hand.
hand from
Hi,
David.
David.
Hello, and welcome back to Canada. I live in Peterborough. Uh,
Oh, my uncle grew up there. My one
oh,
uncle.
nice. Uh, I've been unfortunately widowed twice, and I turned my pain into purpose. And I'm an educator, and I run grief recovery workshops. And my little voices always tell me, how can you do this if you haven't completed totally your journey? And I was watching one of your videos this morning, and you mentioned a workshop where everybody there was trauma therapists, and you asked them, or the moderator asked them, how many have completed all of their trauma, and nobody could answer yes. So it's quite comforting to know that we can do this work without having all the boxes checked on our own trauma.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, David. I was talking to someone yesterday who has had a really difficult ride in their lives around dissociation and PTSD, and they've just been in it for 10 years, like really difficult. And I was saying to them, it's through that struggle that they teach now, and they teach so effectively because they've been inside of it, and they're not complete to the point they're always in it, but they are. I had a teacher describe it like we're all walking backwards up a mountain, and some people are a little bit further up and they know your path. So I love that you're teaching on grief, and I'm sorry for your losses. And do you want to share just briefly? I don't want to
Yeah.
open up too much, but is there anything you'd share with the group here? Like, what if there's one tip about having been in that experience and then leading that you'd give us of what you come back to or what you've learned?
Well, it's kind of around, you can't heal what you can't feel.
Hmm.
And so I use the word, we must feel it to heal it. And the trick, it's the same fine line you're talking about is, how far do you go in the feeling, and how quickly and how deeply? And once you get in it, what if you can't? What if you have to back off a bit?
Yeah.
And so I think the best way out of this pain is through this pain, and it's not a quick journey, as people may know. And there's no finish line. We don't get rid of our grief. We just grow as our grief shrinks. So that's
Yeah.
kind of where I lean into.
That's beautiful. Thanks for your work in Peterborough. My uncle is with Kojiko up there. He was doing
Okay,
the yeah. Thanks for sharing.
thanks.
Emily, any other hands or questions?
While Emily's looking, let me just, if I could just say one more thing, David, to your point. I, Often I'm working with people who have a question about trauma, who are not necessarily trained as a trauma professional, but are working in that domain. And this question about, well, how would I know when to back off or refer on? At what point am I over my head? And so this isn't directly to you, but just because this comes up a lot, is one thing I've heard, which resonates for me, is if you're working with trauma and you're about to ask a deepening question, but you don't know where that's going to go or what you would do once you get there, that's a time that you've hit the edge of your competence. As you probably know, like sometimes I meet people where they just keep deepening and then they land someone in over their head and they don't actually have the tools to know what to do once they've gotten there. David, to your point, I wouldn't necessarily know at that level of grief. There's a map that you have that I might not.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the things that you're learning, I think, as a trauma professional is what do you do once someone's in that dysregulation? How do you work with them? And if you realize, I don't know what I would do if I land someone in that, I think that's one of the moments to back off. Again, David, not for you, but just wanted to say to the whole group. So
Well, that's why I'm spending so much time on the content that yourself and Willoughby have, so that I can be prepared for things that show up.
yeah, that's great.
Because,
Thank
yeah, thanks.
Oh, yeah, thanks for doing
Yeah.
that. That's the whole inspiration for doing this is just have that map. So yeah, thank you.
Um, so we have a question that says, I'm very comfortable exploring my own trauma, but I have been surprised at how hesitant and avoidant, perhaps coddling, I am when working with others and their trauma. What tips do you have for building confidence in this area?
It's a great question. Would this person be willing to come on, do you think?
Let me see.
If they are, would
If
you?
you are, can you unmute?
No
Hi.
pressure.
Hi,
Hey,
thank you so
Laura.
much.
Can it's such a great question. Do you mind if I ask, is it like one-to-one work that you're in or what happens when you back off?
Yeah, so I'm a student actually.
Okay.
And I've noticed that in sessions one-to-one, when somebody brings something up, if they make an excuse for it, like if it's a peer, but they're acting as a client, gets teary and they'll sort of, oh, I'm really tired. I flew this morning. I'll join them in making
Yeah.
excuses for it or jokes about it and say like, it's okay. We all get tired when we fly. And I'm like walking with them out the door to avoid discussing it. Or just noticing as I reflect on sessions that they mentioned something and I could have sat with
Hmm.
it longer or probed a bit, but I kept the pace. And so, yeah, it's very surprising to me because I sort of crave examining my own trauma,
Yeah.
uh, but I've just been really hesitant with others.
What do you know what you're afraid would happen if you didn't go at the door with them?
I'm not entirely sure. I guess, I mean, I'm afraid of my capacity to hold it in a way that will help them.
For sure.
Like, do I know what to do next?
That's great.
Um,
Let
yeah.
me ask you, this is such great territory, especially if you're training. Do you think that's a grounded assessment? Because it might be, that actually might be you being quite skillful of saying, I don't know where to go. Let me not go there yet.
Mhm.
Or do you sense it's like coming from a place of avoidance and fear within yourself?
Um, yeah, I think it comes from a place of it's of avoidance and fear and probably past experiences of witnessing people's trauma because I notice with different demographics it's different.
For sure.
Um,
Yeah,
I'm more willing to push forward when I work with men versus women.
for sure. Yep.
And so I'm just like, how have I experienced people's trauma or emotions in the past and that coming into it? So it's been an interesting area to work through in terms of self-reflection.
Isn't it so deep? It's so
Mhm.
like, and for all of us here, I just feel like we can't, when we ever do this work, here we are and we can't avoid it. It's like our stuff is just right there. So I would
Yeah.
say you're right on a fantastic place to explore. And I'd encourage you to lean into the supervision there. If
Okay.
if you have, is just say, here's a place that I need to grow. Here's an edge. This is a
Mhm.
big mirror for me. And then as you start to edge out into it, you ask the next question. I think this is what all of us here are doing is you'll be in the practice of you ask the question and then tolerate the wave that comes up of fill in the blank, whatever that is, but really fundamentally sensations. Can you
Mhm.
be with one wave of that? Okay, that was scary to ask that. Can I still hold them? And you'll build that confidence over time. If I can tell one quick story, when I was at UBC doing my clinical work, we had that two-way glass. And I had a client came in and said, I'm so angry. I'm so pissed. And I said, that must make you really sad. And, and I could see all the people watching, my supervisor on their side of the glass, I could tell they were like, oh God. And he came back, the client came back and said, no, I'm so fucking angry. And I said, that must make you just really sad. And I went back to the room later and everyone was like, what's your relationship with anger? And so it was just a mirror. I'm like, oh, I can't be with anger. It took me 5 to 10 years of client work of learning to tolerate my own fear. And then I became a better clinician. So I just say, you're right. That's the place to explore and just keep bringing all of your attention there and get support. And you'll fly. It'll be great.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that.
A very sweet comment saying, love your statement, David, that mindfulness is essentially an exposure technique. What I hear you saying is that the role of the practitioner is to assess whether the client's nervous system has the capacity for that exposure at that particular moment in time. And Laura points out the practitioner also has to assess their own capacity to hold the energy of that exposure in that moment of time.
100%. We could all go home now. Or that's to me, like that's it. That is, I wish I had come up with that is so well said because that is mindfulness. It is exactly that, assessing in real-time way whether the system can actually contain or metabolize that which was too much to bear. Now that's an art and it's not just a technical problem. It's not like, oh, I think this is going to go well. It's as to Laura, to your point, it's a moment to moment practice of knowing I'm going to tighten up, I'm going to loosen here. And it requires us to stay so awake and attentive in our session work. And that's the mindfulness part of it. And then I love this part about also us assessing, can we be present for this? The best teachers, I'll get back to Tara. I keep talking about her, but my experience when I've been with Tara is she's done enough trauma work in her own life that when someone brings trauma, it's not a problem. There is so much space in her own system to handle rage, grief, loss. So you can feel that when you're in dialogue with someone who's done a lot of work, that they have a wide window of tolerance. We could, Michael, maybe you'd have an opinion on this, whether enlightenment is just an infinite window of tolerance.
Hmm.
Someone once said that to me. I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. It's just, you're just wide open. There's space for everything. So anyway, Emily, thanks for that. That's great.
I'm not seeing any other questions right now. Michael?
Yeah, I'm wondering, so you came out with a workbook this year on trauma-sensitive mindfulness that built on your earlier work. So what did you learn over the years that made you think it's time for this workbook in this kind of way? What changed? It was had to do with COVID, your own growth and learning, which always is going on, or what?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's so satisfying to have a conversation like this because I can feel the terrain that's been traversed, at least for me and the community over years. Because when the book came out in 2018, for the first 3 or 4 years, it was mostly trying to raise a flag around the potential negative effects that meditation practice could have around trauma. I think it worked well speaking to a Canadian or mostly Canadian audience. One of the reasons this worked well is that I'm not coming into a room with a lot of ego and saying, you're all messing up. Like I was coming in with kind of a Canadian sensibility of saying, there's a lot of space, there's a lot of warmth, and I have some concerns. Let's talk about it. So that first chunk was really about the harms. And then this last, I'd say, couple of years, especially post-COVID, or I know pandemic continues, but the last couple of years, I've noticed people taking trauma-informed mindfulness work in very nuanced directions. So cognitive behavioral therapists, internal family systems, I just did a course on, DBT. I have someone I know who's doing mindfulness and traumatic brain injury. So it went from a more blunt conversation, more gross, to these much more nuanced expressions. And the workbook was meant to say, here's everything I've got. Here are all the scripts. Please take it and run with it. Everyone, please go. If you're doing grief group, as was talked about earlier, there's so many ways to work with this. And then finally, Michael, we did 4 chapters on specifics. So we did mindfulness and trauma inside of mindfulness-based stress reduction, or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, or mindful self-compassion, or yoga. So we wanted to take deep dives into specific areas to get really nuanced about best practices.
Okay, I
I
think I have
just,
one more question, unless there are other.
we have a question.
Oh, we have a question. Go ahead.
We do. So, do you recommend 5 senses-based mindfulness practice for folks who have experiences of trauma as a way of practicing attention focusing, but hopefully on a more neutral focus? So, 5 senses rather than whatever else is coming up?
5 senses, do you know, I don't know if it says in the chat, is it 5 senses all at once?
Would the person like to unmute?
If you're there, I'd love to just make sure I'm hearing it right. Oh, in turn.
In turn.
Okay. So this is great. These are the fun kind of questions about where it gets technical. So yes and no. I would say here's the positive part. Absolutely, there will be one way in trauma work, in trauma-sensitive mindfulness, finding specific senses that are supportive of the window of tolerance is very useful. And that can get away. Often we're working with the sensations related to the breath. Now, as an example, the breath will not always be a neutral place of focus for someone struggling with trauma. Our respiratory system connected to our sympathetic nervous system. So if you just come into a meditation class and you have trauma and you're asked to pay attention to the breath, that might be a useful place to cultivate concentration. But if you had some trauma connected to your breath, which a lot of us do, that attention can end up creating more dysregulation. And as we talked about earlier, create problems. So in that way, having different senses to work with absolutely 100% can be useful for cultivating mindful attention, working with sight, working with sound, working with touch. I have a whole class on bringing in different objects. Here's one I have. This is my friend Moth. Moth came from a friend of mine. This is like a soft little fuzzy moth that someone will bring and actually just work with this in a practice as a way to cultivate concentration. So, yes to working with the five senses. Here's the problem. If you end up using the five senses and skipping around when you start to feel discomfort, that won't actually end up, in my opinion, not being of service for people struggling with trauma who would benefit from increasing their capacity to be with uncomfortable sensations. So if, for example, I'm working with the breath, I start to feel perturbed. If immediately I go to sound, I'm not growing that muscle of being able to stay present. So as long as you're not skipping around, which can happen and we end up practicing avoidance, then I think the five senses can be great. More is modulation. This comes up in the course all the time around what anchors do you work with? What are secondary anchors? What are resourceful anchors? There's a whole series of work here that I won't get into now, but I love that question. It's a great one.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Elisa. It's great.
And quite often, these kind of conversations lead to a webinar that we present to explore deeper. But in this case, we're encouraging people, if they're interested, to find out more about your course and offering some kind of very big discount as well. So just what have you learned from teaching this course, and what most resonates with therapists in your course?
Oh, great. Thanks for asking. Yeah, well, thanks for partnering with me. Um, we talked about it, like let's offer a big discount to the group here. And so thank you. And I mean, the course is basically everything I've got. It just was like, okay, let me package it all. Here's a certification. It's just like a body scan. We take a deep dive into, for example, if you're going to do a body scan, how would you do so if and when trauma is present? How would you recognize it, etc.? So I'd say the main thing that I've noticed people learn is first recognize how do you recognize trauma in the context of meditation? I think that's really hard. If you're offering contemplative practices to people, it's often hard to assess, okay, where's their window? Is this trauma or is it not? How would I assess that? When is it problematic? When do I refer on? And then on top of that, there's all these advanced skills that we can learn around, for example, like resourcing. When would I encourage people to use a tool around resourcing? When would they do a body scan? When would they work with, as we just talked about with Emily, external senses? When would they work internally? How would they do that? So really, it's just about a toolkit. And then the core of it is knowing when to deploy the different tools. That to me is the art of this, what we learn. I mean, all of us here on the call, we all have a bunch of tools. The art of it to me is you know what tool to use in a particular moment, like or that the paintbrush, like what color do I want to use here? So I'd say a therapist come away with saying, I know what tool to use in this moment based on this model around window of tolerance, etc.
Well, we're getting close to the end. I do want to say, David, first, thank you so much. This has been terrific. And we will send everyone who signed up for this interview, this session, we'll send the video to everyone. So if people have come in late or they want to hear something again, you'll get that video in the next couple of days.
Mhm.
So you'll get that. And I really, really do thank you, David. The work you're doing is so important, and it's been such a pleasure. And we have a little funny tradition to end these programs. If people would like to unmute and say thank you to you, it becomes a cacophony of thank yous and greetings, and our community is kind of together, unmuted in a very strange way. So thank you, David.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Thank
so
you.
much.
It's great.